and welcome to Luxhabitat Talks, the podcast that's your address for luxury property and design news in Dubai. I'm your host Anisha, and I'd like to welcome you to our very first episode. The aim of this podcast is to deconstruct the Dubai luxury real estate market to make it easier for you to understand. Over the next few months, we're going to go over a variety of topics covering the Dubai real estate market, including market reports, investor reports, developer interviews, and understanding and answering your questions and doubts surrounding the Dubai real estate market. This podcast aims at answering questions like, should you sell your property right now? Or should you buy one instead? Is it the right time? This podcast will give you all the answers from our real estate experts at Luxhabitat. Feel free to email your questions to podcast@luxhabitat.ae. Now on to our first episode. Today we're going to be going over the latest findings of the first quarter in Dubai's luxury residential market. Our Luxhabitat analysis reveals that despite a 28% drop in volume of transactions over the previous quarter, the secondary residential market is making a comeback. To weigh in, I've invited our Associate Director, Ghai, to offer her insight. Sally-Ann has been in the UAE since 2007 and has in-depth experience of how the real estate market has developed and performed in both Dubai and Abu Dhabi throughout an unrivaled period of transformation in the UAE. Welcome to the show, Sally.
Hi.
To start with, let's dive deep into the stability of the secondary market in this quarter. You said in a report with Property Finder towards the end of last year that you expected quality properties in the secondary market to make a comeback. We are finding renewed interest here. Are your sentiments the same?
Yes, I think that really the market needs to be looked at in a longer term context. Things move and change slowly. And the advantage that sellers had during the last price peak in 2013, 2014 was a real consumer confidence in buying properties in Dubai. It was a new market, but by that time people were comfortable. Plus a fairly limited supply, especially of villas. Now that supply advantage is no longer the case. Sellers have to understand that they really need to be competitive with properties in other areas. But as long as the pricing is set right, I think that the period we've had over the last couple of years, sellers have come to understand that they need to price competitively. And that's happening now. People have got a realistic idea of what they'll sell their villa for. And therefore, I think we're back in the game. It's become relevant again to buy a new property, a secondary market property in a mature area.
Okay, so we expect a certain oversupply this year despite delays. So there are a lot of incentives like post-handover payment plans, there's a waiver of DLD fees and other initiatives, especially when it comes to like off-plan products. What do you expect in the coming months for the off-plan segment?
I think one thing that I'm noticing with buyers who are end users and mean to purchase a property that they're going to live in themselves is certainly as the new properties come closer to handover, they are starting to filter into their recognition of something that could work for them. If they have to wait just a year or so for a home, then actually the off-plan becomes relevant for people looking for a long-term home. So the advantage that the new properties have is, yes, if they can offer longer post-handover payment plans as opposed to just buying a secondary market property with a mortgage where you need to have a 25 or a 35% deposit, certainly that's an advantage for the off-plan units. But nevertheless, with more of a close eye on developers, making sure that they have more cash down and skin in the game before they can start to sell the properties, you may find that some of those initiatives start to dry up. Developers really need to watch their bottom line now, and there's only so far that they can go.
All right, so as a buyer or rather an end user in this market, what should I do? Is it a good time to buy, would you say?
I think you've got a lot of choices as a buyer in the market. If you go for an off-plan property, then you maybe don't have to wait too long now for that handover, but you need to factor in the fact you're going to be living in a community that could have construction, quite heavy construction going on around it. It will be ring-fenced, of course, but it's nevertheless not as mature as some of the communities like Emirates Living, for example. You can also choose to be in a more established community. One of the benefits that the first wave of development had in Dubai is that really the prime spots, the prime areas. So in those more mature areas, you've got two choices really. You can take on a property which needs renovation, and the sellers need to understand that you've got to factor maybe 200,000 to $1 million of discount into the price if an end user is going to be spending that on renovating for their own home. Or you can take on a property that's already had upgrades done and just move in comfortably, start living your life in an already established community, which I think appeals to a lot of people.
In terms of upcoming communities, which ones come to mind that you think would be a good fit for someone looking to buy a home?
Upcoming communities in the newer areas, the off-plan. I think Dubai Hills really is something that's very relevant. It's rationalised floor plans, learned all the lessons from the first wave of development, so there really are some good floor plans and great quality of finishings, which is something that people tend to look for, especially European buyers. There's a certain level of expectation, so I'd probably take that as my number one.
All right. As for sellers, what do they need to keep in mind? Do you think they should hold off listing their properties for sale? I understand that they realize that their properties might be a bit overpriced at this time and that they are making a little more realistic expectations from their sale.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's starting to happen. It's been a bumpy ride for sellers for the last few years, having lost that advantage of a more restricted supply. It's taken some time for them to let go of price expectations. But I do feel that asking prices are generally reasonable now, and we've still had sustained sales in the property market. So I don't think there's any need in holding off on listing properties, because really it's been a price correction and not a dip in the market. We're now at a rational place with prices in the new landscape of a bigger selection of villas for buyers to choose from. So while I still think that there'll be some gradual appreciation over the long term for buyers who buy in an established community, it's really not anything that it's worth sellers holding out now or next year. It makes no difference. They just need to enter into a sensible conversation with buyers to make sure that they're priced correctly for market. And I think a lot of people are willing to do that now. I'm certainly feeling that in the market ahead of summer. Sellers know what they need to do to get their home sold.
All right. So as an investor, what options do they currently have while looking into investing in the market? I know Ryan's coming on to give us a little more insight on that, but I'd love for you to give in your input when it comes to capital appreciation, especially.
Well, I usually work with villas, and so I would say if you're looking at investing in a villa, you probably can't expect more than a 4.5% yield. So if I always say to people, if you're just looking at yield, you need to be really clinical and just choose something which will be in a prime area, stay rented, and not have too many dead periods. And that's really the best thing to look for. But it's a different equation than buying a home. But I'm certainly seeing that there are Emirates Living properties just for the average family who want to rent for 200,000 to 300,000. That maybe a seller who really doesn't want to sell might consider leasing their property until they look at selling it a few years down the line.
Thanks for your insight, Sally. Now on to the next guest on the show. Ryan Kasper, Director of Luxury Rentals at Luxhabitat, is now here to give you an update on the rentals market. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
That's right. Thanks, Anisha. Thanks for having me.
Could you please tell us about the state of the rentals market?
Nisha, the state of the rentals market is quite good. I mean, thus far this year, we've seen some mega transactions. In fact, records being set, in fact, in terms of price, and a relatively large influx of wealthy clients coming into the market. What's more is this is occurring during a time when rental prices, we're seeing them drop 5, 10, and even in some extreme cases, upwards of 20% over last year.
Wow, 20%.
Yeah, so this is obviously a very unique part of the market that we see, and then very especially at the very top of the market. And oftentimes this is unique and upgraded properties in particular, which are experiencing these drastic changes. I think this is of course having a secondary effect also, with more owners looking to offer better incentives, discounts, and flexibility. In terms of the number of checks, among other things.
Why do you think there's such a change for upgraded properties? Because usually upgraded properties are way more enhanced than the regular build, and they always have a certain type of character, and they're sometimes even more appealing. What's going on here? What's
right.
The difference?
Well, I think this is something that we can look at Dubai and we can say, more or less, around the city, everything's been built 8, 10 years ago now. This was a city that kind of came up very fast, all at the same time, and we're seeing at this point suddenly the same thing over and over again, more or less like a cookie cutter effect. That's sometimes how apartments and floor plans have been described in Dubai. And I think now that buildings are getting a bit older and there's newer properties coming onto the market all the time, it's much more important that we have owners who understand the importance of upgrading their properties, as tenants are always looking for something different, especially tenants coming to Dubai from their home country. People that are coming to Dubai for the first time to rent, they're expecting a different sort of standard. They're expecting something that might be more like home, which is always important to keep an eye out for.
All right. In terms of yields, rental yields, what areas seem to be a better investment than others?
There's two sides of this. According to I think Property Monitor, you can see the average gross investment yield in Dubai is going to be the highest in less centrally located areas. Specifically, you look at Silicon Oasis, Dubai Sports City, Jumeirah Village Circle, for example. These all generally gross around and upwards 8% on average. But then when you come into the prime areas, I guess on the more apartment side, you'll see like the average yield is going to be 2 to 3% lower. You'll see maybe higher yields in buildings like DIFC, for example, Dubai Marina. You'll see that around 6%, 6.2, and then followed by downtown Dubai maybe 5.4. Palm Jumeirah around 5.1.
Okay. In terms of luxury areas, would you say like DIFC and Dubai Marina probably provide the most value?
For the time being, if you're looking for a ready property, I'd say, these are established communities. Like I said, they've been around 10 years or longer. And they already have a sort of sense of community, which again, when you look at it from the renters or the tenants' perspective, that's important. You don't want to necessarily find yourself in a place that's a bit too far off or away from where you want to be, especially when you're trying to establish yourself and acclimate yourself to a new city.
Yeah. Speaking of Dubai Marina, I believe we have recently rented the most expensive one-bedroom.
That's correct. Yeah, with the most expensive one-bedroom this year so far has been rented. Can't disclose the price, unfortunately, but considering the location, which is great, it's in a fantastic building. The tenant, I'm sure, will be very, very happy there.
Does this mean that now is the best time to snap up some favorable rental investments?
Yeah. Anisha, I think I'd say right now there's probably very, very many promising developments. either ready and available now or soon to be handed over in the next few months or years even, that are going to be attractive for investors. Now, these developments, these developments, along with several other, kind of large-scale projects that we're seeing happening throughout the city and coming up across Dubai, I think this will mean there's going to be many new, exciting opportunities for buyers and, more importantly, maybe a wider selection for tenants.
All right. Thank you for coming to the show, Ryan.
Thank you, Anisha. Thank you.
That brings us to the end of this episode. Tune in next week as we discuss the role of blockchain in real estate. You can find us over the Apple Podcast app, SoundCloud, and many other channels on your favorite podcasting app. Please find time to review and rate us. It helps bring our ratings up and helps us reach more listeners. See you next time.